Well, January is nearly over, and we are on to Genesis chapter 4 this week. In this chapter, we open with Adam and Eve beginning to fulfill God's charge to them to be fruitful and multiply. We're told about two sons here at the beginning, and notice how they give credit to God for that. And we're told in chapter 5 and verse 4 that they had other children other than Cain, Abel, and Seth. But we're told about these three in chapter 4 for a reason. And so after the sons come along, we have the first worship story of the Bible. And it's evident here that God has always had standards for worshiping Him. It's never been whatever we want to do. It's never been whatever goes. Because Cain tried the whatever goes method and found himself rejected by God. And while this text does not explicitly tell us what was wrong with Cain's offering, we do have a couple of observations we can make without speculating. First, we're told in verse 4 that Abel brought the firstlings of his flock and their fat portions. So he brought the first that he had to offer and the best that he had to offer. But for Cain, it just says that he brought of the fruit of the ground. Some people think that there's something to that, some don't, but that is there. We do also know, though, second, from Hebrews chapter 11, that one of the differences in the offerings was not really about the thing they brought, but it was about themselves. That Abel brought his offering by faith, and implied then that Cain did not. And so given those things, here's what we can confidently say about Cain. His offering did not meet God's standard, and whatever the issue was, the root issue at the deepest level was a faith problem. And I think we see that in the way that he responds to God later in the chapter as well. Notice his response. Cain is very angry, and his countenance falls when he gets the news. Who's he mad at? The answer is God. He felt like he should have been accepted, or maybe he was jealous of Abel, or whatever it was. He's mad at God, which is clearly not the right response in this situation. And notice God's warning to him in verse 7. If you do well, will not your countenance, your face be lifted up? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door, and its desire is for you, but you must master it. That is still true for us, too. That sin crouches at the door. You might think about the devil prowling about like a roaring lion seeking someone to devour. That's always been the case. And it is up to us to master it, to rule over it, to not give in. This unchecked anger and rejection of God's counsel leads to the first human death, the first death in all of history. And it was a murder. You could almost call this persecution, because Abel is being killed because of his righteousness. He did what was right and accepted, and Cain was angry about that, and so he killed him for it. You could almost call that persecution. What's so amazing to me here in this story is how God responds after the fact. So like in verse 9, the Lord said to Cain, "Where is Abel your brother?" He comes to him with a question, just like he did with Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. He came to them asking questions rather than immediate condemnation. Even though he could have, he knew exactly what they had done in both cases. And yet he gives them a chance to come to him, to lay it all out on the table, to own up to it. But in this case, Cain just outright lies, which seems worse than Adam and Eve's response when God called them on their sin. And even still, even after that, with this curse that he places upon Cain, I still marvel at God's mercy in that. He could have given Cain the immediate death penalty. It could have been all over. And yet, he gives him the opportunity to continue living. And isn't it ironic that as Cain is wailing over this curse God has placed on him, that the thing he's worried about in verse 14 is somebody killing him, considering that's exactly what he had just done? And then we're told in verse 15 that God promises a sevenfold vengeance on the one who would kill Cain. We'll come back to that in a minute, so keep that in the back of your mind. From there, we have Cain moving east, which in Genesis is almost always a bad sign. And then we're told that he settled down and built a city. Remember what God told him back in verse 12. He told Cain, "You will be a vagrant and a wanderer on the earth." So it seems like this is another act of rebellion against God. However, not everyone sees it exactly this way, because it says that he settled in the land of Nod, which doesn't really mean anything to us, except in Hebrew, the word Nod means wandering. So he settled in the land of wandering. But I really don't think that makes a difference here, because in verse 17, he built a city, and cities are permanent. They don't wander. They don't move. And so it seems that he is still rejecting what God told him to do in that. Then we break out into a genealogy. I know we tend to glaze over at genealogies, but particularly in Genesis, we have to resist that impulse, because there is a lot hidden, in a sense, in these genealogies. And so we're given a list of names, and then clearly we stop and focus on one of the individuals in this genealogy, particularly Lamech. Lamech is the 7th generation from Adam. Keep that in mind when we get to chapter 5 next week, and watch for the 7th generation in that chapter, because there's an intentional contrast being set up, and Lamech is the first piece of that. And we're told that he took 2 wives. So we're already departing from the pattern for marriage given back in chapter 2 and verse 24. That's a problem. But then we get this statement to his wives in verses 23 and 24, where he owns up to, but really it seems like he boasts about killing people. I'm not sure whether he killed 1 person or 2, but at the very least, the last line of verse 23, he killed a boy for striking him. He kills a kid because he hit him. This is a bad guy. And notice then too in verse 24 that if Cain is avenged 7-fold, then Lamech 77-fold. And so the point is, well, if you thought Cain was bad, then wait till you see me. Lamech is such a bad dude. You better watch out for him. And so he's boasting in his evil. And there we see how we end up in the place in chapter 6 where God says where God talks about the great depravity, that every intent of the thought of his heart was only evil continually. We see that already by the 7th generation here with Lamech. Interestingly enough, some people detect a connection here to something Jesus said. When he asked, how many times should we forgive? Up to 7 times? Jesus' answer is translated variously, because numbers in Greek and Hebrew don't work exactly the same way that they do for us today in English. Some translations say that you should forgive 70 times 7 times, so 490. Some Bible translations render it as 77 times. And so, should we do up to 7? No. 77 times, or 77-fold, however you want to do the math. Either way, you see an interesting parallel here, where Lamech is the opposite of what Jesus tells us to do when we should forgive. Then, beginning at verse 25, we find a new branch on the family tree. And this branch is very different from the line that goes through Cain. This is the branch that will get it right. That's why we're told right at the beginning that this is the time when people begin to call upon the name of the Lord. I don't think that means people had not been worshiping before that. I mean, think about what Cain and Abel were doing. And we see clear hints through chapters 4 and 5 that Adam and Eve are still people of faith even after they were removed from the garden. And so that's not the point. The point is that through this new line, the line of Seth, people are calling upon the name of the Lord. Instead of rejecting the Lord like the line of Cain, this line is going to get it right. And it is through the line of Seth that hope and deliverance will come. There's much to think about. I hope that helps you as you read in Genesis chapter 4 this week.